Craft means I actually am in charge of not only writing any text that's in the game, but handling any of the outdoor content that you're going to be doing in the game. Mostly the what are you doing when you're playing the game and you're not doing a dungeon run or a raid with any or any of the group content. I tend to focus heavily on solo content. Zone stories are a big thing for me right now. Like for the last expansion we did, I took Zoldazar, which was a big troll zone, spec'd out what the story was going to be for that, wrote a lot of the dialogue for many of the different quests, worked with other designers and artists to make sure that we had all the props we needed to make sure that the zone came off the way we wanted it to. And then I worked with Dave's team when they were doing Rostacon's Rumble to make sure that we weren't crossing the streams on what our trolls Blizzard are like. So
yeah, what I love about working on Professions is that it's sort of like this hobby system that you get to play with in our game. You know, you have classes and they're very they have very unique identities. They do very specific things. And with Professions, I get to sort of push those boundaries by borrowing some of those abilities sometimes and handing them out to the players who normally would have no access to that ever. So you know, mages can go invisible, but there's an invisibility potion that you can get too that everybody gets to play with. So having something that is not core to the gameplay of World of Warcraft, which is combat and playing your class and stuff like that, you have this other sort of secondary fantasy that you can play out as a blacksmith or an alchemist or a gatherer, or maybe you love playing the auction house and that's your thing, but a lot of that gets funneled through Profession. So for me, I just like building fun spells and toys and stuff and putting them into the players' hands and seeing how they react to it. So that's pretty much why I really like working on Professions. When I was working as a level designer before that, it was all about building the world. You know, you're creating the landscapes, you're laying down the POIs, you're setting up all the areas for the quest designers to come in and add all this rich story to it and stuff. So you're setting up the atmosphere, and that was really fun to do too. You're telling a story through art. So there's a lot of, you know, good creative stuff that comes from that as well.
So I'm also quest design, similar to Zach. For me, it's moments. You get to make these like cool little moments that people can go experience. And you get to do stories and explosions and just fun creatures and things like that. And it's kind of working towards the big overarching story, which I think is really kind of fun to just like get to play in those little sandboxes and make little things that people can enjoy.
I'm a systems designer. Before I joined Blizzard, I didn't know what a system designer was, because I think that's the first place I've actually ever heard of them. But, so I designed systems, which I compared to designing the rules of the game. If, for example, you think of chess, I would be the person figuring out that like a pawn can take left or right or whatever, right? Like the pieces and how they can win the game. I enjoy that because I really enjoy being able to envisage what the game is going to play like 6 months from now. And a lot of that comes down to rules. I do not care about the story at all. At all. I'm sorry. But exactly. That's why we're a team. Because otherwise, WoW would be really boring with no story and just a lot of rules. And that's why I enjoy it. So.
Yeah, I'm a lead mission designer right now and was lead quest designer on World of Warcraft. I come from a writing background, so you know, kind of creating the story and emotion was very important to me. It was interesting moving to Hearthstone because Hearthstone is, you know, it's not a very narrative-oriented game, but it still has a lot of characters and settings and vibe. And it's interesting telling a story in Hearthstone because you're sort of allowing the player to create a story and you're trying to create moments where the player can create a great story and have a lot of fun with that. Not sure how to directly answer the question, although I do have kind of a funny story in that when I came over to the Hearthstone team, I was worried. I was like, hey, I'm not really good at this game. I'm like a rank 15 player, and in Hearthstone, that's not very good. And you know, how important is that going to be for this role? And it turns out not a big deal. Especially as the team lead, I have the advantage. I can make sure to hire people that are really good at Hearthstone. And what we find is if it's fun for me and I suck, and it's really fun for our player that's like top 50 in the world, then we know it kind of works. If it works at both levels, it definitely works. So being good at the game was actually not that important for being a designer in the game. That's not true across the board, obviously, but for Hearthstone, for the missions, certainly that helped.
For me, I've also not been huge on storytelling. I was always like, what's the boss fight and how do I kill the boss and why do I care about anything else besides the boss? And so in all RPGs, like I would play Final Fantasy, I'm like, oh, well, okay, what makes this guy cool? Like, what abilities does he have versus her versus this guy? And I always thought that was really cool because I think it's because I watched Sailor Moon as a kid. And it's like, what does each Sailor Scout do and why are they cool? And so I've basically translated that. And also as the youngest of three, I'm used to being beat up like a lot. And so being beat up by like 5 million virtual players, they got nothing on me, right? So I equate it to my job and what I do. I kind of equate it to blackjack. As someone who makes encounters, and because you're supposed to win, right? You're not supposed to come. If I wanted to kill you, I could kill you. It's very easy. It's very easy. But it's more like blackjack, right? Like I lose if I go too far over. Like I bust, right? It's too hard. I've busted. But also I lose if I go way too far under and I give a 7 and you have 18, right? So it's just real fun, like push and pull with the community and the player base where I get to be like, yeah, I'm that guy who made that fight that you didn't like. Come at me.
So I took a couple notes so that I wouldn't forget by the time it got down to me what I was doing. So I apologize if it sounds like I'm reading off because I kind of am. So I'm a content designer and I do content systems as well. Coming up through QA and doing a lot of automation testing and being technical, and then going onto the StarCraft team doing technical design before I did mission design, I have a more technical bent to things. I tend to know like all the parts of the editors that I work with. So not every mission designer on StarCraft knew the trigger editor and the data editor and the terrain editor, but I knew all of that stuff. And what was fun for me about that was growing up as a kid, when I wanted to make games, I wasn't thinking about programming. I wasn't thinking about making the systems because I'm not a min-maxing type of gamer. I was thinking about what are the cool escorts you can do? What are the fun units you can come up against? What are the cool ways that you can build your base to protect against attacks and things? So as a mission designer, I got to do the triggers and scripting. I got to do the AI for the enemies and when they attack. I got to do the conversations and the transmissions of, what the Tal'Darim are going to say when they come at you. The mechanics, is it going to be an escort or a holdout, or what makes this a tug of war? And then terrain and layout. And being able to be more of a generalist is super fun because you get to play with all the toys. So, yeah. And then you get to interface with all the disciplines. Like I talk to engineering every day. I talk to artists every day. I bring them by and I go, what are you working on? This is what I'm doing. Cool. Oh, and then you think we should have a giant laser beam from the sky? Yeah, that totally works. That's awesome. Let's do it. Which is all super fun.
The answer to should you have a giant laser beam from the sky is always yes.
It's always yes.
It's always yes. Should we start at this end? Make them work for you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was wondering if anybody could share some of their path towards working in game design, and then like, if anybody had something to say about like what the common paths towards game design are, and how we can all kind of start working towards that.
So I can't speak to that. I guess everybody can. So the question is, what are some of the paths that you took to get to your game design jobs, and what sort of advice would you have to people looking to start the path?
Yeah.
So my personal story is growing up, I was super into video games, and I would do like the Tony Hawk skate part editor and the Warcraft 3 editor and RPG Maker, and then I'd make stuff and I would subject my friends to all the bad stuff that I made, and they'd be like, "It's fun, yeah, I'll keep playing it, sure." So I always knew that that's what I wanted to do. Going to college, there weren't programs when I was looking at college, so it was like, well, I could go for computer science and then program and maybe make things like Excel, or I could go into film and then maybe I'll find a way to like make film make sense for design. So that's what I did. I went to UCI for film and media studies, and then while working at Starbucks behind UCI, it happened to share the parking lot with Blizzard, and everybody would come in to get coffee, and I'd be like, hey, oh yeah, you want a latte? But how'd you get into your job? Which is distinctly different than can you get me a job? It's like exactly the question you asked is, what's the path? So I was able to leverage that into an internship in QA where I was like the Starbucks guy, and then came back after school, ended into QA and worked on stuff after hours. I worked on the StarCraft editor before it was even announced that we were like working on the game because I was like, let me play with it, please, please. And they were like, fine, but not on hours. It's after overtime you can do that. And I was like, okay. And I come in on weekends and work on the editor. So that's kind of my story. I guess I'll leave it to other people to talk about advice.
I always had a real passion for game design. When I was young, I played a lot of games like board games, Duck Hunt, way back then. I used to run live action role playing game Vampire the Masquerade. I was super passionate about it. It consumed my life. I played Magic a lot when it first came out. I dropped out of high school and then taught myself how to, using the Half-Life editor, how to build a mod for Half-Life. And then I suddenly realized, hey, people do this for a living. So I sent out, I would say, over 500 resumes and then got about 4 responses back. I actually built like an actual my resume in Half-Life. It was really, really bad. Don't get me wrong. It was like an art gallery. You'd walk through and see all the things that I had done. I wouldn't pay to enter that art gallery. But the key, what I would describe right now, the someone who stands out when they're actually like applying to Blizzard or something like that, is make a game. If you're applying for a game design position, you can write as many documents as you want and show that to us, but we don't ship documents, we ship games. I would also say be exceptionally creative and just courageous with what you're doing. It doesn't need to be the most fun thing in the world. You're not going to make World of Warcraft on your own and send it to us and make us say, hey, that's cool. We should hire this guy because he made World of Warcraft. There's no point in that. Try and present a question. How do I add, like an example, how do I add Diablo style random loot to Mario? Right? And then prove it and send us the example of that. It might be terrible, and that's okay. It does actually. It sounds. I'm going to go. That idea is mine. It's patented right now. But send it to us, and at least we'll show that you're courageous enough to try that. Right now, you're not beholden to a paycheck or anything like that, right? Like you have the capacity to be courageous and exploratory. That's what I personally am looking for when someone applies, someone who's willing to ask those questions and then try and answer them. Even if you're not successful, that's okay. I mean, in my day-to-day job, a lot of the time I'm not correct. I hate to say that, but I'd say if I'm right 51% of the time, that's a good day. And that's okay, right? So failure does not equal failure, it equals experience. So show us that you're willing to go through that experience.
So I had a really weird route. I started in television and film production. I was a camera assistant. I worked on a lot of movies with stunts, blew things up, things like that. When it started going more, a lot of the people I was working with were starting to work on all those reality shows that were starting. I was just like, nope. And wanted to find a home to stay in. So I applied to 3 film companies and Blizzard. And I was like, if any of these people say we'll give you a job, I'll take whatever job they give me. And just because I wanted to find a home and grow in that home. And nobody wrote me back. And I was at BlizzCon one year and talked to a couple people and was like, I've got all this production experience. I've like written, I've done set stuff, everything. And, you know, it's entertainment media. It's similar. And they were just like, nope. And they're like, we can give you a job in QA. And I'm like, all right, I'll take it. So I was in QA for about a year. And from there, just started pestering people and learning as much as I could. And actually worked with Zach in creative development. He brought me over. That's actually where we met. He needed someone to come in and help when we got busy on one of the projects. And I was like, yo, I'll come do it. And started doing media art there. And when I was doing the TV stuff, there was a lot. A producer did kind of everything. Like Tim was saying, you're kind of jack of all trades, master of none. So like you get your hands in a little bit of everything. And I ended up going over to the Diablo 3 team, and I was a producer for them, but I kept pestering people because I wanted to learn how to do other stuff. So I was like writing item name descriptions, like they're very descriptive. And Started like Zavin let me do a couple of like chess where you like have the guys jump out and attack you. And then I went to the Overwatch team also as a producer, but at first I was doing the skin pipeline, and portraits were all the base portraits, and that was driving me crazy because I was like getting the skins implemented, and Punk Tracer had bright pink hair and Normal Tracer had brown hair, and it just really bugged me whenever I was playing the game. So I like set up poses and lighting and got them to set up levels, like show me how to set up the level, and just started building stuff in Overwatch. And then I was like, maybe I just want to just keep making things because that's kind of what makes me happy. And got an opportunity to go over to the WoW team and start doing quest design stuff there, and I've been there ever since.
I'm fond of saying that no two quest designers have the same background, but Sky and I do have a lot of overlap. So for myself, I went to college for film and television because quest design wasn't really a thing then. So I was really big into entertainment, but at the same time, I also wanted to see video games become something that they weren't at the time, which was what they are today, or getting closer. I've been running tabletop role-playing games for 30 years, so I have this vision of like the Matrix and all these other cool things I wanted to see video games become, and interactive worlds and stuff. And then somebody introduced me to StarCraft, and there was that beautiful cinematic where the guys are raiding a space station, and they just like open up this radioactive bin, and they're like, cold fusion, and they've just got these beers chilling on the guys. I'm like, Blizzard gets me. Like, I need that. These are my people. So I started applying, not knowing what even a quest designer was, and eventually got into the customer support department long before knowing anything about design. From a video game standpoint, I knew a lot about for paper design. I knew a lot. I had even built a lot of mods in like Warcraft 2. I built my own version of the Siege of Gondor from like the Lord of the Rings. It wasn't good, but it exists. So somewhere. And I messed around with a lot of level editors and mod editors, and made some 3D Studio Max models and stuff like that. So I knew I liked stuff that overlapped heavily with the gaming industry. Once I was in CS, we got a breakdown. Somebody from the design team was kind enough to come over and explain what it was the different design jobs were, and I zeroed in on quest design and chased it for about 6 years. Missing it the first time 14 years ago, I think was the first time I tried for it. In the interview, I was told afterwards by Kaplan that I came off more as a writer than as a designer. And that always kind of stuck with me. And so I chased out what that meant, and finally found out that, yeah, writing is important in quest design, but the word writing doesn't appear anywhere in quest design's title. So it's important to have that skill and be a good writer, but a lot of 3D storytelling and interactive storytelling has very little to do with what you've actually written, and more to do with the different types of games. It's still a game, so you have to build a game to let players experience and find their own fun, and just really interact with the world. And so I had spent quite a while chasing that, self-published my own role-playing game, just kind of see what that process was like. I will not tell you the name of it because no one should ever look at it again until I get a chance to go at it again. So, and then eventually, after working my way through various positions in Blizzard, Dave was kind enough to hire me onto the Quest team during Pandaria, and I got to cut my teeth on building bomb throwing monkeys, which like immediately was my happiest place I've ever been. So, and yak washes. So anyway, any other questions? How often do you find the game changes during the production of it, like design-wise? The question was, how often do we find that the game changes production-wise during its process? I would say hourly. I give it, and today, like I've had 3 meetings today that were all various game changing, production changing, and deadline changing meetings. So, and that's for World of Warcraft, which has been out for a long time. Like, it should be some of these things should not be surprises for us, but that's been my experience. I could say, anybody from one of the other teams want to speak up on this one?
Hearthstone is unique in that we kind of are launching an expansion every 4 months, which is great. We have a really fast iteration time. It also means you got to kind of crank stuff out. So certainly on the missions team for Hearthstone, we go through a lot of iterations and things change really fast. One of the things we do, it's good to keep a lot of design documentation, but anticipate that things are going to change. So we kind of keep the documentation kind of loose so we can update it because it'll change quite a bit. Every play test, you kind of come back with feedback and drop things that aren't working, try different things that might work. A lot of ideas don't die. There's like, okay, that doesn't work right now. We'll fix that later. We'll do something with it later on, and you take it out of the build. Yeah, it constantly changes, and that's actually a really important part of design. You play test stuff constantly, and you should be play testing stuff constantly because you're going to make up your mind and make changes.
I also think that the magnitude of the change probably depends on how close you are to the release, right? Like, we're saying, hey, change everything. I'm pretty sure that the dungeons didn't change all the way up to the very last second dramatically from like throwing out everything, right? And it helps, and the way that we figure out how big of a change or small of a change we want to make is through playtesting. Like, everyone here plays the game. I guarantee you a lot that they work on, not just at work and the features that they're working on for the future, but also a lot at home as well. So we have a fairly intimate knowledge of what the game is like, and then we play it. We try something. For example, Warfronts, we would play test that every week. Every Friday, we would have a play test. Sometimes more successful than others, but we always tried to. And then we would talk about what sort of things worked, what sort of things didn't. And then as we got closer to release, fewer things changed, right? Like, I mean, I have been on projects where up until the release, a lot of things are still changing. Those are the ones that you're pretty sure aren't going to be that much fun because you're still changing all the things at the very end. So that means that you shouldn't be shipping it because you're still searching for that, like, what is fun about it, right?
It's something that I learned from producers, which is they'll always ask you, how long do you think that change will take you? And you'll give them an honest answer, and it might be a day or 2 days or 2 weeks, and then they'll go, okay, and they'll write it down. And it turns out that they're just doubling whatever your estimate is because designers are terrible at estimating time. So, anybody else?
I was just gonna say I've done both sides of that, and it is true. I thought I would be better at it. I was not.
Yeah, next question.
Mm-hmm.
I would say it depends on the job. If you're trying for a writer job that says writer in it, yeah, but for like design, it really depends on the type of design job that you're going for and what kind of game you're trying for. World of Warcraft is a very different game than like a very super narrative driven game like God of War, for example. By narrative, I mean they also have very systems driven with combat and animation and everything. But like, if you're trying for a design role, like we also have narrative design roles too, and there, that distinction has been drawn as people who help bring the quest design writing up to a kind of a standardized pass, as well as handle interactions with a lot of the voiceover recordings and voiceover actors, and making sure that a character that's being handled by 15 different designers sounds the same across the 15 different designers. As far as tips for quest design itself, just making sure that, like, yeah, your writing should still come across, but you're really trying to get in on an interactive story, or an interactive game. And so for World of Warcraft specifically, it's very much about like, what quests did you find fun, what was fun about them. And it's okay to share cool story moments, but don't necessarily come off saying this was a great quest. It's like, why? Well, because this one guy said this one thing. And it's like, that's kind of like going in for a quest design and saying, I loved this quest because I got this really cool reward off of it. which is cool if you want to go for the rewards team or the or items design or professions or a number of other positions. But for quest design, it's all about like what is the adventure you're going to send these players on, and how do they interact with the world to accomplish that. I'm really drawing a blank on some good tips here, though. Oh, Sky's got one.
So for a lot of the teams I've worked on, show you get the team. Whatever team it is, you get their mood, you get what they create, you get how their gameplay works. You can like definitely bring yourself to the interview, like show like what kind of stuff you like to do, because that's how we grow and learn and evolve as game designers, is by introducing new ideas into the fold. But regardless of whether it's design, art, whatever, like show you get the project that you're applying for, and make sure that the discipline specific, like if you go somewhere like Blizzard where it's very specific on systems or quests or combat or whatever, like make sure that that's the discipline you like. And if you're not sure, like talk to people, find out what the differences are, and what things you enjoy more, and kind of show that that's what you get and what you want to go for. And don't be afraid to change, because
and by team, you probably mean product. Yeah. So you got to know WoW. If you want to apply for WoW, and one of the first questions we ask is like, what's your main character? And you say, oh, I spent a week getting like a level 20. It's probably not going to work. Like, to be honest, like if you don't play the game as passionately probably as we do, or more, and be able to talk about it fairly fluently. And I think what Kaplan was saying to Zach when he said you came off as a writer is quest designers write a lot of text, but they also create a gigantic amount of actual gameplay with the content that they build, right? Like his references to the first things he did on the team weren't, hey, I wrote this interesting story about Arathas. It was about monkeys throwing bombs, which is what the player was actually doing with monkeys, right? Like you want to focus on that kind of thing. Like what is the player actually doing, and how am I strong to that, right? Like if you were applying for a quest design position now, submitting a wall of text, I mean, it's not going to get you very far unless you're applying for like a narrative designer or something like that. It might be valuable as like a writing sample. But what's more important or valuable would be like, hey, if I was to rebuild this quest in that I played through this quest, right? Like, and it was cool, but here's how I would rebuild it. Here are the quest steps. Here's the text. It's exactly what the player would be doing. This is the sort of important NPCs that I'd introduce. This is the sort of gossip options that they'd have. This guy would be a vendor. This is the race that they'd be. This is, the female, male. This is the kind of voice that they'd have. This is where I'd go. This is how the player would travel there. This is the sort of things that they'd have to do, right? Because that is the day-to-day thing that Zach solves, like that, right? Because he's had a lot of experience doing it. When he also sees the game, that's what he sees, right? So if you're applying for that sort of job, that's what we're looking for, is do you have the capacity to just from the outside look at it and go break it down into what is the player actually doing and how would I rebuild this myself? It's more than just writing text.
Yeah, I had a lot to say, and then he just said it. So
That was all excellent advice, especially just what Sky said. Know your product. If you know that the game is already released and you're applying for a game that's already released, you better be a freaking pro, right? You're going to walk in there, you're going to say, here's what I like about your game, but here's what I don't like about your game. But also, here's what I do to fix it. Like, go in there and sell yourself, like I'm a creative powerhouse. I have a lot to contribute to your game. Here's the top 3 things that I'm excited to put into your game. But that only helps if you know what the game is that you're working on. A lot of the times that you apply for a game, you won't exactly know what the game is. Sometimes they'll like lead you into a back room and be like, do you want to play our game for a couple minutes? Sign this NDA. We'll show you what's up. So if you don't know what the game is, just having that wealth of knowledge of games that you've played in the past and just sort of being able to identify, well, what makes a shooter fun? What makes a sandbox game fun? And just being able to like identify those things and just sort of communicate to the person who's interviewing you, like, hey, I understand, like I have my finger on the pulse of video games. Like I understand what makes it fun. Here's what I think makes those kind of games fun. And here's what I think I could do to make it better. Like, don't be afraid to walk into an interview and just act like you're a rock star, because you can be. It just sometimes takes a little time.
As far as portfolios, the function of a portfolio is to back up the words that you put in your resume and your cover letter. Be like, I'm so good at this. Then the portfolio shows that you're at least trying to answer these questions. So really important things are scope. because you need to finish things. If it's half baked, if it's half done, if it hasn't been shared with your community, we're probably going to notice, and it's going to show that you didn't like. You're not paid to like play with an editor. You're paid to ship a game, so you need to show you can finish a project. So if you scope it down to things that you know you can finish, I know I can make a StarCraft mission. I know I can make a Mario level in Mario Maker. That's better than I designed the next version of Dota, which requires systems and AI and heroes and abilities and terrain and everything. The other thing is you're paid to do the job, and the learning you do is going to happen on the job, but it's incidental. So we don't want to take you on as an apprentice. We want to take you on as a worker. So you need to know that we need to know that you can show us that you have the experience to do the job when you show up, not to learn it in the first 3 months. So yeah, I think that's it. Sure. What's up?
How do you all balance between designing for what you think would be most fun or most fun for the most amount of players?
The quick answer is play testing, I think. Like, oh, right. Sorry. The question. So, how do we balance what we think is fun versus what the community will think is fun, right? So, because each person is a special snowflake and we each have our own histories and ideas and things we like, it's important to think of things that you think are fun and make those experiences, but it's also equally as important to play test and put it in front of as many other people as you can to make sure that they also agree, because people like different things. Like, I like to press a button and see stuff blow up, and maybe Candace likes to figure out what armor is the best defense to be a really cool tank. And like, those are different ways of looking at the game. They're both valid. And if you come into a design discussion saying, well, I think the answer is this, and clearly every player is going to do that, and so that's why we should solve this problem this way, it happens a lot. So it's important not to.
You'll find that a lot of game development teams will work in large groups because of this. This is exactly what they're trying to resolve. Like, you'll have it's really important to have an Andrew Chambers on your team who doesn't listen to the story. How am I going to inject the story to him through the combat abilities that he has to pay attention to? That kind of stuff. So having a diverse team is the most important thing, I think, in order to combat the like sameness that a game can get into, and also just sort of like not just playtesting yourself, having other people playtest. Feedback is big. As a game designer, you're gonna like the worst and the best feeling in the world is whenever you've shipped your video game and you pull up Metacritic, or you pull up like the forum of like, here's what I liked or here's what I didn't like. Like, I made a boss once that I was so proud of. He had this like really unique mechanics, and the top 5 things on the thread were like, the boss model didn't have nipples, and that's all anyone cared about. It's like, oh, what do I do? But anyway, we got onto the tangent of nipples, but I think it's important to just have a diverse crew, listen to the feedback, listen to your players, or listen if it's a game that you can't iterate on, it's not like a live game like World of Warcraft, just try to learn from the games of the past.
Tons and tons of playtesting on the Hearthstone team. I have to kind of present a little chart. There's like on the mission design team, there's just like 3 or 4 of us, and we like testing just about every day or sometimes every few hours. And then we kind of kick it up to the rest of the design team at some point. And there's like now 12 people are playing. Every Thursday in the Hearthstone team, we pick something that we want to play test, and the whole team play tests it. And we get tons of feedback there. And then Blizzard also brings in focus groups as well. So you get a lot of feedback from that as well. And so what we're trying to do is exactly what you said. Like, you don't want to fall into the trap that we often fall into, which is like, oh, that's really fun for designers. Like, if you know what's happening under the hood, that's super fun. Well, but it's not going to be fun to play if they don't see that. And so a lot of play testing will help, and we get great feedback. I mean, an engineer on the Hearthstone team might have just a completely different take on what's fun about the game, and that's awesome. And then we get that feedback as well. And you can kind of, if you get enough people play testing it, the ideas will start to filter out. Some stuff you see feedback over and over. Something isn't working. They're not quite getting this particular thing, and then it's worth really examining that and saying like, okay, is there a way to redesign it to make it more obvious, or is this just something that's not communicating?
I'm just going to say I'm very glad that nipples came into the conversation. I'd also say that being somewhat being an expert in the domain, right? Like, we all play a lot of different games. So when a question does come up about, is this going to be something that's going to be fun? We can reference a lot of different games in the game industry that have come out recently, and we can highlight, hey, this was really fun in this portion of the game, or of this one, it wasn't fun here, and this is why, and we can talk about that. So we have a reference point that isn't just our own understanding of it or our own personal opinion. It's more of a like, how does this fit into a bigger picture?
Yeah. Playtesting.
Pretty much. We had a question way in the back. Yeah, you've been passed over a few times. So what you got?
So creating an engaging journey to put the players on, how does that pipeline sort of work? Does it start with quest designers and you go to the art team and say, hey, this chain of quests, I need these kind of assets, or these kind of work that's already been made, and you send them down to the club?
So the question was, when we're designing a journey for the game, what, where does it start? Does it start with quest design or in other positions, and what do we do to kind of build those out? Depends on this, at least for World of Warcraft, on the quest design side, it depends on the scope of the particular journey. I built side quests that managed to make it almost all the way to beta before anybody actually saw them. So, and thankfully they were perfectly fine-ish. So, with a few tweaks here or there. But there are the ones that are a main, like, if we are designing a zone that's going to be 3 to 5 hours worth of content, usually what happens is our level design team will hit the ground first and give us a block outs of kind of what the vibe of a particular zone is going to be visually, and they're working with a creative director, and usually now our narrative directors are getting, or narrative leads are getting involved as well as our lead quest designers. And usually at that lead level, they kind of hammer out like the big bullet points of, this is a swamp zone, and there's going to be blood trolls, and this zone is going to have like dinosaurs, and so they'll hammer out the main details, and usually the main story that we kind of want to use to tie all of our zones together. And then it comes down to each zone gets its own zone point from the quest design and from level design side, and we work together to kind of hammer out an outline of what we want to have the overall zone story be, and how it, and we also have to keep in mind all of these milestones of how it fits into the rest of the expansion cycle. You mentioned, how often does production change? One of the Zoldazar, we changed the main villain of that zone, I want to say 5 times, and we changed where the zone ended 3 times. So I had to change my flow a few times based on city changes, layout changes, weren't getting a model in one case. And it all kind of came together in the end, but we still have to, usually what happens is those big zone stories wind up becoming very living document. Like, we have to stay scrappy and keep updating them based on changes that come through. And that's usually how zone design goes. I'll let Scott talk about professions.
Oh, sure. I mean, not a terribly big journey. I mean, we tend to look at what we've done in the past, what's been successful, what we can do more of in the future, and what new things are coming in that we can tie into, either from a story standpoint or just from kind of like new mechanic standpoint, stuff like that, things we're getting. So yeah, when we're looking to build professions, it's a lot of keeping in mind like what the profession is. So if you're an alchemist, what's fun about being an alchemist? Making potions, doing transmutations, all that kind of stuff, and making sure that we sell really well, and that we give players a lot of those things to craft and play with when they're done with it. So yeah, by the end of it, one of the things that I think you'll hear a lot in the games industry is that the game's never finished until it's up, until it's on the market, till it ships. So we're constantly working on. We even hotfix stuff, even after the game has been shipped. So yeah, we're constantly iterating on it and stuff like that. So the journey never really stops. We're always making changes and trying to make it as fun as possible for as many people as possible.
So on the different teams I've worked on, it can go both ways. Like, sometimes an artist will come in and be like, I drew this dude and he is amazing. And everybody will look at it and he is amazing. What are we going to do with him? And then they'll try and like build off of the visual that they saw. There's also moments when like one of the writers will be like, oh, I have this storyline that I really want to tell. And it's like, okay, how can we incorporate that into what we're doing here? Designers will come up with like, I want a guy that, like on Overwatch, he'll be like, I want a guy that like blows shit up or goes really fast or deflects things. And it's, what does that guy look like? And then the artist will go and draw some different ideas, and it'll be like that one. So there's a lot of back and forth. I think the more you communicate between the different disciplines and contribute to one another, kind of the better the product is overall. When like even when I first went over to the WoW team, one of the artists who had been interning on Overwatch was like, I drew this flute and I really want to do this thing where a guy's playing a flute and there's a snake. And I was like, I will put that in the game for you. I ended up making like a goofy little quest line where you go and like use the flute to like charm snakes to bring him back to the fox guy. And like you never know where inspiration will come from. So like talking to each other and the, going with the back and forth, I think overall makes the product better as a whole.
Yeah, there's a there's a Blizzard value that every voice matters, and we try and incorporate that into everything we create. So certainly on the Hearthstone team, every expansion starts with like a team-wide brainstorming. Everybody who's working on Hearthstone comes into this room, and we throw post-it notes on walls, and just every crazy idea is good. And then sort of our favorites get together and. We just sort of have a very rough pitch of what the set should be about, and then we just let the artist focus for 2 weeks on just draw stuff that inspires you based around that. And a lot of times, then we just work with the artist and we pull out ideas from that. And it's very organic process, and that's very important because you don't know where the good ideas are going to come from. They're going to come from everywhere, and really try and build that into the entire product.
A lot to underscore a lot of what everyone was saying. Video games are a very pipeline driven process. So, for example, there are things you can change. You can change how much damage something does later down the line without having many ramifications. But you can't change like, well, we don't want this to be a water elemental boss anymore. We would like it to be a cheerleader, right? Like you can't change the model. So it's important that you understand the vision of whatever it is that you're doing, especially in encounter design and quest design, because you need to start getting the ball rolling on all the factors of the things you don't even think about. Okay, well, we know what the story is. We checked with our creative director who said, okay, well, this is going to be an expansion about orcs. And it's like, okay, so the first thing I say as a designer is, what can I fight that's not an orc? Because people are going to be sick of orcs. So we work with them and we say, okay, what is this thing going to be? Once we determine what it's going to be, we have those creative brainstorming sessions. Well, you have to get a character modeler on it. You have to get a concept. You have to get someone that sketches it in 2D, who then makes it into 3D. And then you have to decide, okay, well, if it looks big, what does it sound like? We have to get the voice acting. We have to get the writing. And these are things you spend big money on. So these are the things you need to start rolling early in the process. So I think of myself as an encounter designer and as a game designer, kind of like a cheerleader. Like what I do is I champion for an idea. I get the vision in my head of what this is going to be. Okay, this is going to be a giant tentacle monster. What does that mean? Well, it probably means that he's going to cast shadowy, dark purple effects. So I tell the VFX artist, okay, give me some stuff that sparkles and make it purple, And he's gonna, okay, well, what is their language like for the tentacle monsters in our game? Well, it sounds kind of Cthulhu. So get me a voice actor and go like, yeah, and stuff. Yeah, I'll do that again for you, by the way. So you have to get but you have to be, and even if you're second guessing yourself as a designer, like, do I want the tentacles to like have flails on them, or do I want the tentacles to be barbed or look like scorpions or whatever the hell you think it is going to be? You need to commit to it, and you need to get everyone else excited about it. You need to walk into that animator's office and be like, you want to know what I want my tentacle to look like? I want it to go like this. Like you gotta get everyone excited. Sometimes you gotta be silly. Sometimes you have to kind of put yourself out there and be like, here's what I think I want it to be. What do you think it should be? And he did. He dressed up as a panda and he sold the story of Mr. Pandera to all of us. It was dope. But yeah, so getting the team excited, getting everyone on board. Ultimately, people are going to work better on something they're more passionate about. So you have to be the creative like vision holder, but you also have to give and take to get the process going. So there you go.
Yeah, just in the yellow.
How do you balance something when so how do you guys balance something that the player base or the community wants that is radically different from your design pillars? So if the community wants something like, for example, like one of your design pillars is to have a very diverse cast of characters to choose from, say it's like Overwatch, where you want different body types, different cultures, and things like that. But all your community player base wants
is like pin models. How do you balance player satisfaction without having to give up your creative vision and your design pillars that hold up the game and the narrative?
So the question is, how do you balance your design vision against what the community wants?
Yeah, and especially if it like if the community wants something that I guess almost in a way contradicts what one of your design pillars would be.
It's a really interesting question. I think that's part of the reason why we don't actually talk too much about what we're working on until we're ready to show it, because we feel that those pillars come through in the final product, and that final product that we release will appeal to the right kind of community. Does that make sense? If we release something too early before we had really established our vision on something, then there's a good chance that that conflict would occur, because we might come out with something where there was, an accidental release of a imaginary accidental release of like a poster of a pinup girl in World of Warcraft, right? That came out as like a Blizzard thing, and then suddenly a whole group of community came along and they're like, wow, they're turning World of Warcraft into pinup Warcraft. I don't know where I'm going with this, but suddenly that would like engage a portion of the community that maybe that wasn't correct for us. So we tend to be very close to our chest about what we choose to share with the community going forward, because we know that that can then suddenly spur a community movement that once that's started, it's very hard to shift. Once we have our vision in place through art and design and audio and the engineering that comes and pulls it all together, then we can start being confident that we can get up on stage at BlizzCon and start sharing that sort of thing with people. I mean, when Metzing got up and talked about Overwatch, we had a very firm idea of what Overwatch was, right? There was a powerful message behind it. And that kind of inclusionist element was already there and very pervasive, right? If we had a release or started talking about that 4 years or whatever years earlier, when maybe there was only a roster of like 3 male characters, because we just hadn't gotten around to like really refining that vision yet, suddenly when we started adding Tracer, the community might have gone, what the heck are you doing? This is a male only game, right? When that probably wasn't our vision. So we need to be very careful about when and how we communicate things to the public.
There's 3 big sources of feedback that we have to balance when we're listening to people. So there's community feedback, what people are saying on forums, Reddit, whatever. There's our own internal feedback, like what our own playtesting is telling us, like internally when we playtest stuff. And then there's the actual data, sort of what's at the other end of it. It's actually very important to look at the data, how people are playing the game. We have a whole unit at Blizzard that just combs through data for us, creates charts, what people are playing, how they're playing the game. And balancing that's interesting. When it comes to the community, you know that only like a very small fraction of people are actually on the forums posting. So they are a voice, but they're not the only voice out there. So a lot of times you have to weigh it and compare it with other sources of feedback. So listen to what the community is saying and then look at the data. So if the community says this particular strategy is way overpowered, then we can look at the data and we can actually see, is it overpowered compared to other strategies and not? If it's not, according to the data, but people are still saying that, well, then it probably feels overpowered, and that's still legitimate feedback. And then you can kind of work on that versus when the data confirms what they're saying, and you can obviously mechanically change it. And really sort of navigating all 3 of those and realizing that the people posting on Reddit aren't the entire community. They're just a subset of the community, and trying to balance all the different feedback that you get. There's a trick to it. I can't say that we do it right every time, but it's very important to consider all the sources.
So part of negotiating that line is figuring out what the player wants versus what the game needs for it to be fun. So it's kind of like that Batman quote that I'm not going to remember the specifics of, like not the hero the city wants, but the one that it needs, or something like that. So if I could open up my map and press a button and teleport anywhere in the game that I wanted, it would be super fun for questing because I would get everything done super quick. Wouldn't it be great? I mean, yeah, but then you're short circuiting like what it's like to travel to a place, what it's like to know the routes, what it's like to know where the roads are and where the towns are and where the safe spots are. So design is always about choices, and some of those choices are adding difficult things for the player to overcome. So just because the player may want certain things to be easier or want them to be a certain way doesn't mean that you have to give it to them. And through playtesting, you'll kind of figure out what those are.
And without sounding too diminutive, you can think of, so as a designer, my job is to create content for an audience. I essentially, I'm serving my community, right? I know who my community is. I do a lot of research. I'm part of that community, and I want to give them what they want, right? Because that's what my job is to do. But much like a toddler, if you feed them candy for dinner every night, it's not going to be good for them, and it's not going to be good for you because then their threshold for wanting more candy, right? So you have to like limit your candies when as a game designer. But what's really unique about game design and about games in general is because it's such a living, breathing audience, because it's like an immersive experience. What you can do is you can, when you present something, and like Dave said, that's why we often don't present until we're ready. Because what we can do is like, okay, I know you guys really wanted, Jetpack Dude, and he's gonna come in like guns blaring, like freaking Duke Nukem, and he's gonna chew bubble gum and kick ass, and that's what he's gonna do. And we know it. You guys want it, like whatever. We just thought it was a little bit tropey, like we don't like that person. So we made Farah, and she's got this rich history. And here's why you're gonna get excited about Farah. She does the jetpack thing, she does the jumpy thing, she does the blowing up. But also, here's what's fucking amazing about Farah, and here's why we're excited. And a lot of the times, what people buy is not so much what you're doing, but why you do it. And so if you say like, "Man, we really love this character. She's really close to our heart. She's not Duke Nukem, but she's what we think you'll want." You can give them like a little bit of candy. You can give them the broccoli muffin, like, oh, this is totally a muffin. It's made out of broccoli.
Duchess Nukem.
So with Overwatch, one of the things with the character creation is to the team, what we presented was incredibly important as far as a future that was hopeful and worth fighting for. Like that was the whole underlying premise. So making characters and heroes that were just like, we represent everybody. Like everybody can be a hero. For Overwatch, that was super important. And so and also a lot of it was, it's kind of funny because some of it's planned so far down the road before the players see it or know about it. They're like, oh, you're just giving us pandering to the populace. And it's like, no, we didn't just make that. We didn't just have like a whole cinematic in our back pocket. That took us a while to get there. There is I think some of it is because we're all passionate about games and establishing a vision and everything. You do start to kind of be where your players are because we are them also.
I was gonna say there's one example that comes to mind with what you asked, where every expansion players ask for flying right off the bat, and we know that every expansion, if we give them flying, they're going to miss out on so much content. So we have to kind of like say, well, we'll give it to you eventually, but just play the game. Like experience the zones from the ground level. Don't just fly over the canopies and bomb your target, just kind of aim for your targets that you're trying to kill or trying to collect or whatever. Actually experience it, immerse yourself in it. So sometimes the voice is very loud from our community to do something, we hear it, but we know that there's a right time to release it. So that's one of the other things that we try to do.
So I'm actually going to pull a question off the list here, since we've had a lot of them pre-submitted and stuff. So one of the questions was, how long is the average game design document at Blizzard? I'm just going to expand this to be what our documentation is like and how we maintain it, because each one of us has a very different project, and even documentation, even within the individual team, gets very different. So for quest design, we use like Visio to micro or macro manage a zone, essentially hit out all the big story beats of where the player is going to go, and print up sometimes a big map of the zone and track where everybody's going to go to it. We have a wiki internally that we keep all that documentation on sometimes when we're good about remembering to update it. So, but a lot of times with quest design, it's good to get a lot of that documentation down early and just have it act as the outline for the zone, so everybody across multiple teams can look at it and say, oh, this is what the zone is going to be, or this is what this culture kit is going to be. I've been using the wiki even earlier today to hammer out some culture kits that we are going to do for these 2 new races that we're working on. Not playable, not revealing anything. But to the NPC races that we're making, of like how they interact, what they do, and what their architecture and social structures are like and stuff. And that's just a pitch document. And then at the same time, I went over to another wiki page and started working on some like art research and development stuff that we're doing for how some of our UI is going to interact with quest design. So yeah, that's from the quest design side, or at least from my side. What is the documentation for individual projects?
Oh, yeah, no, we throw up tons and tons of ideas onto the wiki page, and then we have meetings and we filter them out, or we, look at ones that we know we absolutely want, and then we just kind of keep going from there. So, stuff will even come in really, really late into the project where somebody will come up with a really cool idea, or they'll have done something in a quest and be like, hey, wouldn't this make a great foozle? And you're like, oh yeah, you totally have the players craft that forever now. But yeah, for the most part, we just throw our ideas up on the wiki, and then we just have tons of meetings and iterate on it like crazy. So
I think documentation is a tool, and different people use it differently. It also depends on where you are in the project cycle. Like, I just spent a little while prototyping a feature that we're working on, and I would actually say that most of the documentation was really just in PowerPoint, and it was just a pitch thing that I would like share to other people on the team just to get them excited, because I can't walk into the room and throw myself around like a tentacle, or dress up like a panda. I guess I could, but
I was gonna say you can't.
Always an option.
Always an option. You have a panda suit I can borrow? Then as we're moving into, like, now the prototype has been proven out, as we're like growing as a team, there is documentation in place to show other people a bit more fidelity on what needs to happen. Like, now we have all of our locations figured out and characters figured out, so all those things are documented. We have some of our mechanics figured out, those things are documented. As we progress forward and start building more things in the actual game, I actually consider the game to become the documentation at that point. And if a producer comes to me and says, hey, you guys have a document about like this part of it, I'll say, yeah, you load up the game and you go play it, and that's what it's going to ship as, right? Because again, we don't ship documentation, we ship games. When I first started on Freedom Force, we had a 200-page document listing out all the different characters and all the different moves and that sort of stuff. Once we got an engineer, that document got thrown out. Really, it was a waste of time. Out of date immediately.
It's important to have a source of truth. So on the Hearthstone team, there's an Excel file, a shared Excel file of what all the cards are in the set, what they're going to do, and that's sort of the source of truth. Like, anybody can look at that, and that's the absolute latest design. As soon as the designer wants to change it, they go and change the Excel sheet, so everyone kind of knows what's up. When we're doing new features, such as some of the single player content that we've done in Hearthstone recently, there's we have a wiki for sure. Wikis are very nice because everybody can see it and edit it. And there's kind of a loose design on the wiki, like, here's what it's going to do, here's how the flow is going to work. Our UI team has a separate page on there where they can have all the latest mock-ups of exactly how it's going to look. And we try and keep that updated, but we also try not to go into too much detail there, because all that stuff changes all the time. You can always reference the Excel sheet for kind of the latest of what the actual mechanic is going to be. Yeah, we try and keep it loose because you want the design to have breathing room to iterate so much over the course of it.
So when pitching ideas, I think something that's been really helpful, like when I was pitching a game to become a game director, I went onto the internet, spent weeks on the internet looking at like concept art, just like other people's art that I stole off of the internet and put on my little Pinterest wall. That's like, just to get kind of like a a reel of like, here's what I'm thinking. Here's the vein of like the art direction that I want to go into. I want something like creepy and cool or whatever. And just so they like understand the tone of what you're talking about. So using the internet as a resource, like obviously really cool for pitching ideas. But when it comes to documentation, also I found that as I become more senior as a designer, the stuff that I document is less of like a pitch and more like a how to. Like here's the emotion I want to go for. Here's like the ability I want to go for, or like here's what I did in the past and why it worked, and here's what didn't work, and I don't maybe have a solution for that, but the next person who's going to take this job, here's some freaking problems for you to solve, because those are the kind of things that like spark conversation and have people ask questions and will make your game better as a whole.
On StarCraft, we had every mission started with about a 4-page template document that would have sort of like your pitch name for the mission and who you're going to be playing as, who you're going to be playing against, what the factions were, what your intro conversation was going to be, what your objectives were, how they change over the course of the mission, what color the enemies were going to be, what all this stuff, like 4 pages. And you get to the end and they would greenlight it, and then you would go to the editor and you would trash the document. So, but it was important because you could organize your thoughts and come up with sort of what you wanted to do, so that you're not just sitting there flailing for a while, figuring out like, I don't know how big is it supposed to be? What's the mechanic? Can I copy a mission, please, first? It gave you a way to talk about stuff and work through the ideas with the leads and the seniors before you actually, put pen to paper, so to speak. And then after that, we would send emails back and forth all the time. You'd send feedback emails and this and that. And that documentation doesn't count as design documents like pitch documents, but it's all documentation of what worked or didn't work during a particular playtest. So I'd say that kind of counts. And depending on the playtest, you might have a full page of feedback or a few lines or something in between.
I just had an extra thought too. Documentation can serve as like a rough draft of your content of your game, and that's where a lot of its value can lie. If you're like a writer and you've ever written a book, you don't just like write the book from like chapter 1 and now I'm done. And you've just been working on it. You outlined the whole story, right? You said, okay, here's the characters I'm going to introduce. Here's the story arc. Here's what I want the end to be. And that's really important as a game developer too, to understand the scope of what you want to do, because you can get lost in the minutia of the details of every particular piece of content or every element of your game. But until you look at the game as a whole and say, here's what the gameplay loop is, here's what the combat's going to be like, and here's what the finale of the game is going to be like, the documentation can be really useful. Even if you don't follow any of the stuff on the page, just having it laid out so you can scope it, really important.
Oh, okay. Yeah, we have a question. What are the pros, cons of working for Blizzard in comparison to other studios you've been at? So I worked at quite a few other studios. I worked at EA, worked at Treyarch, a couple of other small studios that you guys have probably never heard of. What's really nice about working at Blizzard is the culture there is really good. Like everybody really tries to adhere to our core pillars. They really care about making great games. They really care about creating fun experiences for our player base and stuff like that. It really is a design-centric company. I haven't really ever been in a situation where it's like, well, what's this going to cost us? If we make this decision or make this change to the game and stuff like that. Like, it just doesn't really happen on the dev teams at all. Everybody's thinking about what's the best thing they can do for the game. So, in terms of working at like other companies, when I worked at EA, again, it was very strict. It was, this is our deadline. We have to get it done by this day, and it doesn't matter if you guys are going to crunch until you're, dead. You're going to make this date and ship this title. So, and if you have to sacrifice quality for that, then so be it. So, I mean, EA has great games too, but I'm just saying personal experiences. So, but yeah, for Blizzard, one of the things that you hear a lot is, we'll ship it when it's ready. So, and we've pushed dates. We've, given ourselves more time to make sure that the game or even a patch goes out when it's ready. That's one of the things that I think I like working at Blizzard the most.
So the best thing is I'm often in meetings where I feel like the dumbest person in the room. That is fantastic. Sounds like it might not be, but it really is. There's lots of people that I can learn from and grow from. Learn and grow is actually one of our core values. Thanks. It's on the orc around in the center. I should know it. Another good thing is, so we were talking about how to monetize a certain part of a game that I was working on once. And I was in the discussion with the game director, and we would pitch ideas about, hey, what if we sold this, or what if we did that? And at the very beginning of the meeting, the game director said, okay, everyone needs to put their Blizzard hat on, and we're going to vet these ideas. Are they evil or not as a player? So we would pitch an idea, and if anyone in the room said, it feels kind of evil, I feel kind of yucky doing that, we would put that aside. It wouldn't feel like it was a good idea. Almost any other company that I've worked at would not have put on that hat. They would not have put on that thing. They would have gone, how's the best way to monetize this? And what do we think we can make the most money from? The core there is that what we are interested in is ensuring that our games are fun, first and foremost. Our games are of a high quality, first and foremost. And then the rest will come, right? Like we put out a product that is engaging and drives a large player base and has a lot of people playing it and is what at the end of the day most people want, which is fun. The rest will come, and that's okay. That's probably the cool thing about working at Blizzard for me.
Yeah.
Any other questions in this room? Oh, wait, we had one in the back. Sorry. All right.
Oh, okay.
Spotlight's on you.
Is directed towards Hearthstone.
Hey.
All right. So, I'm curious as to how you balance a metagame and a constantly evolving game that's pushing out patches. You guys are designing much before you even see the design, the metagame take shape for what you just pushed out. And as a player, I can kind of see that sometimes. And I'm just curious as to what your approaches are, because I've seen you guys handle it very well also. So how do you react when the metagame changes for the next expansion you're going to release?
That is an awesome question, and I got to say I'm not the expert in that because we have a team of what we call final designers, and they do some serious voodoo because they are very high level Hearthstone players that understand this stuff at a level well beyond me. Repeat the question. Yeah. How do we balance the Hearthstone meta when often we're working well in advance, and in this case we're working sometimes a year in advance. And so, as I was saying, there's a final design team that really focuses on that element of the game. They try and leave themselves some wiggle room. There's a lot of card designs that can easily be changed right up to the last minute for how much damage they do or what their effect is, so that sometimes we can adjust the balance of a set to react to what the current meta is. In general, the philosophy with Hearthstone has always been, because we want people to value the cards, we're very reluctant to make changes once the game is out there. So often we take big risks with the design before the set is out, and once it's out there, we don't want to change a lot of things. We want to let it ride. We also want the community to solve problems as much as possible. So if a particular deck style is dominating, we love for the players to try and find a solution to counter that. And so it's only again, looking at the community feedback, the internal feedback, and our data, and trying to balance all of those feedback before we say, like, okay, this is off kilter enough that we want to change up something in the game. Recently did a balance patch because of that, because it was just a little too lopsided for our comfort. And we want to be really conservative with that. We want you to know that if you open a card in a pack, it probably won't change. So we have to be very careful with changing it. I think there was another approach would have been change stuff all the time and just have the community expect that we'll constantly change the meta. And we so far have been reluctant to do that. We really want the cards to have value. But yeah, it's an interesting science, especially when you're designing sets so far in advance, and you kind of have to react to what's happening out in the world at the same time.
come into as part of what you're looking at to stay competitive?
The question is, how much do we play competitors games to stay current in the market? Every day. I try and play a different game at lunch every day. Like Apex just came out. I started playing that. Lots of thoughts. Yeah, I think staying engaged and active in the domain of the industry is actually really important. Like when I first started, there weren't that many games out, like it really wasn't a bigger space. But nowadays it's a lot harder for sure. But it's also a lot more, like there's so much cool stuff out there. And if you're not active in playing the games, you can't make good game design decisions, right? Like you can't, I would not expect someone to just off the top of their head come up with an awesome game idea, right? There's never been done before. Everything that we do now is built on the success and failures of the people that came before us.
I'm just going to throw one really stupid thing out. I'm really bad at finishing games now. I've been a lot better at playing a broader spectrum of games, but I'm really horrible at actually getting to the end of anything now.
Oh, I have one more thing. I don't like to talk much, but actually, since I had kids, I don't have a lot of time to play games. One thing I do really enjoy is watching games being played on Twitch, stuff like that. Like that's awesome that exists because I don't have the same amount of time to engage in every single game that comes out or the savings account. But I do have the ability to just stream things on Twitch and watch different people play, and a game that I might not ever download because it's a hard game and I get way too scared and have nightmares. I can still watch that and then close it whenever I get too scared. So.
Yeah, we're constantly playing tons of games. I love the independent game scene right now is super diverse, and so you can see a lot of people experimenting with a lot of great ideas and play around with it. So that's super fun. We play stuff off genre too, just to pull ideas from it. I remember when we were when I was still in the Wild Quest team, we ran a Minecraft server for a while, and that was pretty epic. That was awesome. So just constantly different types of games to learn from.
It's also important. It's good to keep up with games in your genre and things that are in other genres. But if you I don't worry too much about whether I'm missing out on games that I should be playing for the most part, because other people on our teams are going to play those too. And if you haven't played the same games, you'll come with different perspectives. So, as a small anecdote, I was working on Heroes of the Storm like way back when it was Blizzard All Stars and Blizzard Dota and then Blizzard All Stars, and then it went back and forth. And I moved off the team before it really got up into full production. And during that time, I was the only person on the whole team who had never played League of Legends. And so I was doing tech design, and people would come and be like, okay, we need you to make this new ability. Okay, what's it called? This. Okay, how does it work? Have you played League of Legends? I'd be like, no, I haven't. So describe it to me. And it was valuable in playtest to be able to be the person who had not played that game. Not that I was at that point like, it would have been easy to jump in and learn it and have a good time, but then it was like, the other perspective is important. So.
And what Sky said, very true. Don't finish games, but when I do feel compelled to finish a game, it's really special because I'm like, why did I want to finish this game? I do feel overwhelmed with the amount of games I should be playing, whatever. But when something really catches me, like when Undertale really caught me, I was like, this is a stupid 8-bit game. Why do I love this so much? And it's got the story. The story's okay. Why am I crying? Right? Like, what just happened? But also, like Tim was saying, sometimes it's important not to play the game, and not just so that you can be the voice of like, I don't know what this jargon is that you're using, but I took a break from World of Warcraft, and then I came back and I didn't remember a lot of stuff. Or like I played Final Fantasy or 14 when it first came out, like a lot. And then when I returned 5 years later, I didn't even know how to like teleport back to the main town. But in a living, breathing game like World of Warcraft, or like in a game like in something that's going to stay online, a persistent server for 10 years, it is really important to have that perspective of the returning player. How do I know how to play this game anymore? What makes it fun? What catches my eye about this game? And why should I keep playing it if I played it 15 years ago?
That's a really good point. When you play games, play them actively. Like take note of what is working and what isn't working with whatever you're interested. Be it the story, be it the mechanics, be it the inventory system, whatever it is, the UI. Look at what really works and what isn't working, and be able to talk about that and communicate that. Because inevitably, if you're in an interview, they're going to ask, "What are you playing nowadays?" And then, "What do you think?" And it's important to have a well-conceived answer to that question of why this game works or doesn't work for you, and what you learned from it.
All right, so we have a question coming in from a Discord that I figure I'll toss out there. What are some techniques in developing the scope for non-instanced content, such as spawning and balancing abilities for creatures or characters? I think that's mostly related to World of Warcraft, I assume. So, developing the scope of non-instanced content, it varies greatly. Quest design tackles like zone stories. Professions handle their, well, I'll hand it to him in a sec. But trying to get the scope of how long something is going to play is something we've got 14 years worth of data to pull from. If you're in a POI for too long, you know it. If it takes more than 20 minutes to get through an area, or if it feels like 20 minutes is not long enough for a particular size or cool space, we'll add to it. But it's gotten to the point where we're very easily able to eyeball and something that the level designers are making and decide how much content is it going to take for this, and how long should I keep the player in here before they become bored. So yeah, did you guys have anything for professions or related stuff? No.
Yeah.
We said.
So for scoping non-instance combat or just non-instance content, or just scoping anything in general, for example, when we make a dungeon in World of Warcraft, the first thing we do is we walk out. Usually it's like a gray box. There's nothing in it or anything like that. We will have our initial design of like, here's what we want the bosses to be or whatever. But if you've ever played World of Warcraft, you know that dungeons have a lot of trash, and we call it trash because that's rude. But what you do is you just incrementally design. Like whenever I do a paper design for a boss, or whenever I make a dungeon, the first thing I do is I go in and I put monsters in there. And that might inspire me. Like, oh, now we've gone through this hallway for too many minutes and there's been too many of the same monster, right? And so you'll learn a lot just by going in and stand it up ugly. Don't finish it. Bring it to 30%. But bring it to 30% all the way to the end, right? So like make sure that every corner, every nook, every cranny of the dungeon or the zone or whatever has monsters placed on it. And then you say, okay, well, now that's cool. What makes these monsters cool? And then you can kind of add to your design. I found that whenever I was a junior designer, I would over design everything, where everything's really complex, and I'd have to be like explaining to other designers like, well, it does this thing or whatever. And now I find that I put in the very bare bones minimum, and then I play test it. And if people start to get bored, that's whenever I start to like reactively hammer down those nails, right? Like, okay, you were bored. Why were you bored? Who are you? Now, how can I add this thing? Like, oh, you're melee DPS. Like, okay, add something for the melee DPS or whatever. Because not only is that like, that's really efficient, right? Because if you brought it to what you think as the designer, as like the over designer named Candace Thomas, and I bring everything to 100%, I could have spent 4 months on that thing and then cut 2/3 of it because it was overly complex, or the player couldn't get it, or we didn't get the art to support it, or something like that, because I asked for everything under the sun, right? So stand it up ugly, put it in front of people super early. Don't be afraid for them to say I didn't have fun, because you can solve that. That's your job as a game designer.
The question was, how do we collect feedback and how do we act on it? I'm sorry, or through play tests. Okay. How do we collect feedback from play tests and how do we act on it? We, at least on my team, we have our leads have a play test time set up. They all can go in the, well, I feel like I'm hugging the mic here, but we have our leads have a playtest lab, and they'll all go in there and play, which is grueling if you're in there listening to them, because they are very honest about their opinions. And there was a joke for a while there about how we're our own worst critics, and so because we love playing the game, and we all have very strong feelings about the game, and we all are very loud players. So we definitely get a lot of very raw feedback in those sessions. And what's nice is we have when things work out, we have a producer in that room who's taking down notes, and then we just kind of filter it down and distribute it to the various designers who worked on that content so that they can actually have some action items on here's what the leads felt about the content. And it's the designer's job to read that feedback and interpret it on their own. The leads try not to tell you, do it like this, or at least they're getting better at saying, don't do it like this. They're just like, this is the problem I had, and how would you fix that? And and so it falls to the designer to try to find solutions for that. And then we'll go back through that loop again if we have enough time. We also have the beta loop, which when it goes to PTR or beta for World of Warcraft, we have our forums that we collect a lot of information on. We have QA and a few other folks, and we ourselves are looking at the forums going like, what did this person think of my quest? Oh, that broke. Oops. So those are other feedback venues. We also have peer review groups. So if we have some designers with a few extra cycles, I might throw something to them saying, hey, can you try out this quest that I have? Let me know what you think about it. And they'll send back their own opinions, and I'll try to adapt accordingly. You guys have any?
So back on Reaper, we did a lot of playtests. It was like a group of people that would work on a segment would go and play together, and afterwards we'd all like sit together and give the feedback because the team was a little bit small. Like WoW's a very large team, and one of the things I really liked about that was people would be like, it would be really cool if this explosion was a little bit bigger over here. I'm going to make a bigger explosion for you. You know what would be neat is if this sound was a little bit stronger right here. I'm going to make a cooler sound for you. And that was similar to Overwatch's playtest mad, like at 9 a.m., 6 p.m. And if you're working on a hero, the hero team has one like 2 to 3 times a week playtests, like the whole team hops in. And Overwatch did the same thing too, where it was very, everybody that was touching a hero would go to the hero playtest, and everybody would give their feedback and say what they were going to plus for not what you did wrong, but what they wanted to make better to make it overall better. And those, I think, were really fun and valuable. And it was good team bonding.
For playtest, I would suggest you find a way to learn to love critical feedback, especially if your favorite, most bestest ever idea that you think is absolutely perfect and you love it and you want to have babies with it. Because someone in the room is going to say, I hate it. And that's okay. You got to be okay with that. When they say, I don't like it, what you're really looking to try and find out though is why, right? Like someone will say, I don't like this. So Fist of the Heavens. Someone hated it. They just hated it. I'm like, why do you not like it? And then trying to dig into it. Like, is it the color? Is it the delay? We know we have a delay because we want the Crusader to like pound the ground and it was going to be this awesome moment. Trying to figure that out. And then you can come up with the correct solution to maybe try and solve that problem. Again, you're not looking for solutions in playtests. You're looking for an identification of the problem. Like it's your job to then develop the correct solution or not develop one at all. Like maybe it was just, that's the right thing. Like if this guy hated the delay between clicking and the Fist of the Heaven coming down, you know what? It's a trade-off. It's a cool animation moment. It makes the Crusader feel super heavy, which is one of the core pillars of the guy. And it like allows the player to have a bit of a pause in combat, right? It's an okay thing for an individual person to say, I don't like this, when most of the time everyone is like, that's a cool thing. I don't care.
Yeah, there's sometimes formal or informal processes on the Hearthstone team. Like I said, we do play tests all the time. It's usually an informal process. Everybody sends their feedback with an email, what they loved, what they hated, what was working, what wasn't. Often you just walk over to their desk, say, hey, I hated this thing, or this thing happened during my game. Why did that happen? That's crazy. But we also have this is a more formal process as well. Blizzard has a user experience team that can actually set together play tests then even do the one-way glass kind of thing if you need to, where you can actually bring people in either from around the company or externally at different levels of experience with the game or different levels of experience with the genre, and they can fill out a survey as well as play a build where their time is tracked. And so that's super formal. I think for whatever your project is, arrange some kind of feedback pipeline, arrange some kind of play test where people who've never encountered your game before can sit with it and play it, and you can watch them and just shut up and just watch them, because if you're talking, you're going to wreck it, right? Just let them experience it and make notes of what they're experiencing, and really trying and get that feedback, because it's invaluable. Particularly players that have never seen your game before, you only get to see it the first time once, so you got to get fresh eyes on your game.
Yeah, it was kind of off with something Dave said. Is if our games, when they go to beta, they go live and people are streaming them on Twitch and stuff like that. Watching someone play your content who doesn't know anything about it is also really helpful, because you will sometimes I just want to play really efficiently, like I ninja in and like kill the dude and like get the loot I need to get and go. And some people, they'll like wander all over the place. It's like, where are you going? The thing's right over there, and they can't find the thing, but it's right there. So like knowing that they can't find the thing makes you go back in and go, okay, how can I make that a little bit clearer? And they didn't tell you anything, but just watching them get lost or confused or whatever helps you guide it a little bit better when you go back in.
We did this thing on StarCraft called tissue testing, because we would put new users in a room, we'd have them go through the tutorial, and we'd stand behind them and cry because they didn't understand what was going on. How could they? And the real message that was always given to us is like, we're not shipping you in the box. You can't just stand behind someone and be like, no, that's how that thing works, because you're not going to be there. So the game has to stand on its own. So taking feedback is important, because if you're not there to defend your feedback, and you shouldn't be, because that means you're like being resistant, beyond explaining what you were trying to do, saying like, no, I think it's important that that thing works that way, because I want you to feel this emotion. Like, if it doesn't come across, there's nothing you can do about it after it ships. So it's important to get that from your feedback.
We have time for one more question.
You had your hand up.
Yeah, there's hand up first.
So players are really good at finding new and unexpected ways to play your games. I'm wondering if Blizzard has any like very pervasive philosophy related to that, and how to implement changes into the game via that.
The question is, players are good at finding different ways to play our game. How open are we to it? It's a good question. Players have always managed to find ways to break WoW. It's actually really cool. Nixia, the first time around, players could end up like jumping up onto the cliff, and that was a way to avoid deep breath. I think little moments like that are actually really exciting to us. Like, we provide this content, and for sure we have an intended way for players to solve a puzzle, but seeing puzzles being solved in ways that we didn't expect is really exciting. I think actually there's more room for us to grow in some of that direction, like maybe like not be so reactionary to some of the things when players like break something. We often talk about like how bad is it that it's broken, but sometimes we'll just leave it in. Like it's like, it's not the end of the world that all these PvP players are like ganging up on a certain area and completing a quest. Like, maybe that's okay, because that's what those players want. And if we stop being like that ultra harsh like parent and coming in and trying to go, no, don't do that, maybe that's just going to restrict players from trying to engage in the game in that way in the future. So I don't know if I answered that at all. Yeah, that was perfect.
Perfect. That was the perfect answer. I don't know why I'm adding on to it. For Hearthstone, when we were developing the single player content, there's an interesting opportunity there, because when you're designing a multiplayer game, you really want parity between the players. But when you're doing a single player game, it's okay to kind of let players break the content. In fact, we kind of started to encourage it. Like, we want to just give you a whole bunch of tools, and some of the tools in the single player are deliberately overpowered so that you can find a way to mess with the content, and sometimes just completely trash it because you're smart, and that's actually one of our goals is to make the player feel smart. So I can I'll give a quick example. So Hearthstone, I guess I'm assuming you guys know what Hearthstone is, card game. There was a boss that the gimmick of this boss was he could play a card, and if that card attacked your hero, you were dead instantly. It would instantly kill the hero that it attacked. So obviously, when the boss is playing that against you, it's a really scary thing. You got to make sure some guys are in the way. You got to destroy it right away if it comes into play. But there was another card that you could get that allowed you to copy an enemy card and add it to your deck for the whole rest of the dungeon. And obviously, players figured out like, hey, wait, I can just copy that card, and then I have a card that instantly kills the bad guy. And if you did this, you had to go through some hoops to do it. But then the big bad final boss would appear, and now you had a card that could one-shot it instantly if you could get that into play and keep it alive for a turn. So that kind of breaks the dungeon, but you also kind of have to work for it. And it's really cool. It's a cool story for the player and the single player to be like, oh, I broke it. I figured out this workaround. I did this thing and I'm so smart. And that's awesome. So, within the right context, kind of allowing you to break the content is actually really cool.
For right now, computer games, the computer game itself doesn't have any emotion, right? They don't care if the player wins, right, and beats them up horribly. I used to say on Diablo, that little fallen grunt doesn't go home and cry to his wife that he got beat up by this super overpowered crusader, right? Like, it's completely okay because it's not going to happen. So it's okay to make the player feel powerful. In fact, I argue that that's your dominant job.
Last little thing about that is excuse me, the dividing line for me would be, does it help the player? Does it make them feel good and cool? Does it hurt other players or make them feel bad? Then not so cool. And in a single player game, that's a little easier to deal with because you're not as much worried about the other players, unless the player is short circuiting their own fun to come. They're breaking the game in a way that then the game isn't a game anymore. But in a multiplayer game, like, you might be playing WoW and thinking, isn't it so cool? It's good for me that I beat that boss super quick. And that's true, but that means that you're getting ahead of the curve on anybody else, and that makes them feel bad. So that dividing line, I think, is really important in deciding whether or not something is a good brick or a bad brick.
I am personally hurt when you kill my content.
I will say balance is relative on that note. Someone always has to lose, and I think that's okay, so long as they has the opportunity to win later on, like in Hearthstone. So long as it's Candace. So long as it's Candace, absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you very much, everybody. Thank you for having us out here and stuff, and for all the great questions. I want to apologize to everybody who sent in questions ahead of time that I didn't get to. There were a lot of them. So yeah, but we managed to fill 2 hours ish. So Sandy was saying, hey, we'd love to wrap it up a little bit early so that at least there'd be a little time for mingling. So anyway, thank you very much, and you guys have a good one.